Hi, good afternoon, Pharma OTC world. We at Nutrify today are delighted to host the second chapter of the most demanded topic, the switch, RX to OTC. The first chapter was held in 2020 on guidance and support from Mr. Milan Patel ji, who is the chairperson of Indian Drug Manufacturing Association Gujarat State Board. Nutrify today is bringing this workshop to IDMA GSP and IDMA members. And in the interest of industry, we have opened the streaming of this session on other social media platforms too. To get this session started, I'd like to introduce Chairman of Indian Drug Manufacturing Association Gujarat State Board, Mr. Milan Patel, and Honorary Secretary of IDMA GSP, Mr. Sumit Agarwal. Mr. Milan Patel. Mr. Milan Patel is joint managing director at Troika Pharmaceuticals Limited. He's a chemical engineer with specialization in process control and automation. He has over 30 years of in-depth experience in pharmaceutical manufacturing and quality control operations. He has sound knowledge in international regulatory requirements, which has enabled Troika to export its pharmaceutical products to over 75 countries in the world. He has also been instrumental in establishing various operational and management systems within the company. He has been instrumental in applying his knowledge of automation with good manufacturing practices for pharmaceutical manufacturing, and this has benefited the organization with both high level of automation and complete implementation of good manufacturing practices within the organization. He's a member of several. He's a member of several organizations, and he does several mentorship programs, and also extends his service to various education institutes by invitation and delivers talks to entrepreneurs, and also helps in developing businesses to motivate young students. I must say that Mr. Milan has been very supportive to Nutrify today, and we look forward to delivering value to IDMA members as well as stakeholders of pharmaceutical industry with interest in nutraceuticals. We also have Honorary Secretary of IDMA GSP with us, Mr. Sumit Agarwal, and I'll take the same moment to introduce him. Sumit Agarwal is CFO with Ishita Drugs and Industries Limited. As a second-generation entrepreneur, he has over 20 years experience in the pharmaceutical industry, managing his family-promoted companies both in API and pharmaceutical formulation sector. He has completed his MBA Finance from Narsi Monji Institute, Mumbai, and has also worked with financial institutions before joining this company. With rich experience in API, he has been invited to speak on various industry matters at several platforms. As a member of various industry associations, he has been instrumental in representing about issues faced by the industry to various government departments, regulatory authorities, and statutory bodies. He has various positions held in the various large organizations, like he's an honorary secretary to Indian Drug Manufacturing Association Gujarat State Board. He's a member and executive committee of IDMA national body. He's a member of API subcommittee of IDMA, and is a member of Pharma and Healthcare Task Force, Gujarat Chambers of Commerce and Industry. I'd like to invite Mr. Milan Patel to address the industry stakeholders, please.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Amit, for your very kind words. And I will not take much of the time because I think there are a lot of experts who are sitting here who will be able to, give wealth of the knowledge or experience. But let me tell you, IDMA is equally excited, and I think it's a synergistic combination with Nutrify today. And Amit, as a person, I think he has a lot of insight, and I'm sure that's why Nutrify is going to play a very important role, and IDMA would like to be part of that. Coming to today's subject, it's a wonderful it's a wonderful, relevant, and one of the most important. I would not say most important, one of the critical uh, area of interest for most of the pharma companies because particularly a couple of reasons. One is obviously the pandemic which we have gone through, where it has become very difficult to have a direct connection with the RX prescribers or with the actual decision makers or influencers. And so the direct customer connect has become one of the important criteria to succeed today. And that's where the OTC, or of course, wherever legally allowed, the OTC segment or the nutraceutical segments come into the picture. So, second part of the importance is that as and when a company matures, I mean, there are a lot of people from great companies who have done a wonderful switch from pharma to OTC companies like Glenmark, people from speakers from Glenmark and Abbott and Jubilant are here. They will be able to throw more knowledge on that. But I think at a particular stage, a pharma organization, a healthcare organization cannot ignore nutraceuticals, cannot ignore the wellness industry. India's middle class is growing at a very rapid rate. The awareness is growing tremendously. We have just ventured into nutraceuticals around a year back, and I can see the kind of interest, the kind of questions, the kind of insight the customers want. Since we are going directly to the customer, it's really, really very refreshing, challenging, but at the same time gives confidence if you're going to make good nutraceuticals and offer it to the customers. So it is relevant for any healthcare company that they cannot ignore nutraceuticals. So I would urge my fellow members and all the participants who are there today that maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, a time will come we will have to look at this aspect of the healthcare business and of course go scientifically about it. I mean, nutraceutical has got its various shades, but I do believe that it is now maturing. And in fact, in one of the earlier webinars on the regulatory aspects with Nutrify India, where I was a speaker, there was a lot of talk on how the regulations and how the requirements of nutraceuticals are almost coming at par with the pharmaceuticals, which is good because I think nutraceuticals do need a good name, and fly-by-night operators or fly-by-night products should be identified very easily by the regulators and by the customers as well. So it is something which is a very, very big and a very, very challenging opportunity. And when you connect with the customer, the whole ball game changes. And that is what nutraceuticals and healthcare is all about. Nutraceuticals, a part of the healthcare is all about. I personally am a very firm believer that this is going to play a very important role in the overall business segment of healthcare. And companies will have to come up with good products which are genuinely, elevating the lifestyles of the people, of the population of the customer. Without taking too much time, with such an august panel of speakers from such wonderful companies, I would like to thank Nutrify once again and would be waiting for the participation in a very interesting seminar. At this moment, I would also, take the opportunity that on the occasion of IDMA and Nutrify coming together to serve the industry, I'm taking this opportunity to inaugurate the first global edition of Nutrify Today monthly business bulletin. As I release the first copy, 10,000 members of Nutrify Today worldwide would have got this copy delivered by now, and same is now published on the LinkedIn page of Nutrify Today. It gives me immense pleasure that such a wonderful academic publication has been launched by Nutrify, and I'm very honored to make the launch of it. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Milanji. Really appreciate it. And you inaugurating it makes a lot of meaning for Nutrify today. Thank you so much. Moving ahead. Okay, so we're about to start the program, and Nutrify today is well known in nutraceutical industry. And I will take a minute to introduce this platform to those who may not know about Nutrify today. Nutrify today is an idea to commercialization technology platform that enables and empowers businesses by helping bring new nutraceutical portfolio to market in half the conventional go-to-market time. Nutrify today provides curated business matchmaking, new product development, access to market, finance, and knowledge. With over 10,000 industry stakeholders from world over, which are plugged onto the platform, we are committed to empowering responsible nutrition business. For accessing business inquiries or about the platform, you can always write to us at hello@nutrifytoday.com or visit us at nutrifytoday.com. Switch 2. It's the second chapter of Switch 1. You can visit nutrifytoday.com to watch Switch 1. The nutraceutical industry in India has transformed from 10% per annum growth to 22% per annum growth last year, and now it's settling down to about 14 to 15% per annum this year as the impact of COVID is, should I dare to say, weaning away? But what is more important is with 2% of total global nutraceutical market, India has a long way to go. We are really overwhelmed with intensity at which pharmaceutical companies are working with Nutrify today in launching new portfolios in nutraceuticals. And it gives me a lot of confidence in Indian market as pharmaceutical industry has the power to bring in responsible nutrition to Indian market, and which is very unique to India. We can discuss about it later on, but what I also found out is the challenge remains how to safely switch from RX to OTC and yet leverage best of both worlds. Instead of I talking or organizing a Gyan session on this, Nutrify today handpicked stalwarts in the industry who have been there and done it, and now they're up to next level of RX OTC marketing innovation. We have all of them here in this session, and would be more by, we'll go by real examples rather than ideas and theories. To get the best from the leaders who are there on the panel for RX OTC Switch, we handpicked a very knowledgeable professional to moderate this session, Dr. Vikram Munshi. Vikram is founder and managing director at Whitespace Consulting, and he consults with various pharmaceutical companies in India and in South Asia. He will direct the session today and also introduce you to the leaders in RX OTC Switch from the industry. Dr. Vikram, over to you.
Thank you so much, Amit. Thank you so much, IDMA, chaired by Mr. Patel, Mr. Agarwal. Thank you so much for your support and giving us this opportunity to be here. Really appreciate this, IDMA and Nutrify. Thank you so much. So it's a pleasure to be back here amongst old friends and some new. And I think without further ado, we can straight away start. But it's rather than me talking about introducing the eminent panelists, I'll just tell one thing which is linking all these panelists, which Amit talked about. All of them are practitioners and masters at what they do. All of them. So, as Amit said, there's not really much gyan, but this whole idea of switching, we have, from coming from pharma background, we have certain perceptions. Maybe we are taken by a bit of glamour of going to consumer. But let us understand how switch is, how is it managed, how should the expectations be set from this very, very eminent panelists. So, as I mentioned before, these are panelists who are experts in what they have done. They have moved their game, they have learned, they have practiced before they have preached. So I would request every panelist, as I take the name, if you would kindly introduce yourself, and then we'll straight away dive into the session. So starting with Mr. Brijesh Kapil, Brijesh as we call him, a very quick introduction, please. You're mute.
35 years experience, of which 20 years has been essentially in the pharma consumer health domain, where I built up brands, RX to OTC switches like Revital and Volini, which topped the charts and all when I left that business in 2013. but amongst the top 5 brands and all in the Indian pharma market. After that, worked with Merck Consumer Health, which was taken over by Procter & Gamble Health, and close to 25% of the volumes of vitamin mineral supplements that I've handled. Prior to that, I was with Godrej Soaps for 15 years. So that gives me my FMCG experience, so a mix of both FMCG and pharma working together.
Right.
Look forward to great discussion.
Thanks, Prajesh. Great to have you again. Samir?
Hey guys, good afternoon. My name is Samir. I've essentially got 26 years experience in FMCG, consumer, OTC, and pharma. Started off life in P&G in India, Kellogg's. Then I was with a Dutch dairy company called Friesland, and then I was a marketing head for the Middle East for GSK Consumer. Moved to the UK as global category director for GSK Consumer. So a couple of years worked with Europe and North America. And then I led the entry strategy development for GSK Consumer for India, China, and Brazil. And then moved into pharma when GSK acquired a dermatology business. So I was commercial head for Asia Pacific and strategy head for emerging markets for the derma business, which was a partial consumer, partial pharma business. So a lot of switching happening there, and a lot of brands that were pure pharma, moving that into OTC. GSK Consumer, Sensodyne, I took it to global market leadership across the board. And the last 8 years, I was joined as employee number 1 to set up a consumer healthcare business for an American company called Mundi Pharma. So my last role was as global head of consumer healthcare. So I grew that business 390% in about 6.5 years and took it a global business. So that was my last role over the last couple of years. So great to be here, guys.
Wonderful. Thanks, Samir. Shanta Prasad, can you please introduce yourself?
Thanks, Vikram. Really glad to be here, and feels good to be with some of the panel members who I've either worked with or I'm working with. So I have collectively about a little over 17 years of work experience. Started off with a consumer products company called Heinz. It's a foods company. Globally, they also have a nutrition portfolio. So I worked there. Mm-hmm. I started my career there. Had the opportunity to work on brands like Complan and on the food side of the business. From there, I moved and I used the word, I made a switch to the healthcare side. Healthcare, and it couldn't have been a better choice. So I started off with Abbott Nutrition, where Pediasure now is a popular brand, and was really fortunate to be part of the core team who could really make it big. So it essentially started off with Pediasure, but also saw the entire nutrition portfolio, adult, pediatric, overall getting built there. And we would popularly share this. The Pediasure as a brand literally grew 6x to become a 400 crore brand and dispelled a 20-year-old market leader. So that was a claim to fame. From there, for about a couple of years, moved to a very different space, EdTech, but great learnings. And it's interesting how industries can lend into each other from their learnings perspective. And finally, I'm back on the healthcare side again, by design, by choice, and working with Abbott Pharma again on the pharmaceutical side. My current role is a commercial director, where I'm responsible for 3 businesses. Vaccines, there is a rural healthcare business, and there's a multi-specialty business. But what's interesting is a lot of time is spent in thinking about how to keep making switch. So today we're going to talk about nutraceuticals, but vaccines, there's a lot of direct-to-consumer opportunities. When I was handling laxatives earlier, the opportunities continue. So continue thinking of models that can work. Just one last thing I'd like to say to the group here is the direct-to-consumer world seems like a fairyland, right? Sometimes it's like, it seems like the Disney world. Whether I'll get to it, it looks exciting. But I can tell you, a lot of us here have experienced, those painful choices. It's been tough, but, there's always a way to get by, and look forward to sharing some experiences. Thank you.
Thanks, Shanta. We look forward to hearing your views and perspectives. Vikas, welcome to this show. Welcome to this talk. Can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Vikram. So I'm Vikas Bansi and have about 18 years of experience across sales, marketing, FMCG, consumer, OTC, and healthcare. And I started my career with ITC, and thereafter, understanding the nuts and bolts of sales, distribution, and marketing, moved on to Johnson and Johnson Consumer, and was handling a few brands in the OTC and wound care segment, and also did a bit of channel sales out there. From there, I moved on to Abbott Healthcare, Abbott Nutrition business, and that is when Shanta and I worked together there. So I was on the sales and distribution side, worked with Abbott Nutrition for almost a decade, and I was responsible for driving sales, distribution, and channel growth for brands like Pediasure, Ensure, Similac, and that business, which was about under 100 crores in 2009-10, moved all the way up to 1,200 crores. It was almost a 12-13x growth. So the fairy tale that Shanta was talking about, I think we witnessed it, once together at Abbott Nutrition, and I'd be happy to share some of my experiences that we had, both the do's and don'ts of how to make a successful switch and what to avoid. I think that's a critical part when we talk about OTC switch. And recently I've moved to Jubilant. So I've now moved from consumer healthcare to pharmaceutical. And so I work with Jubilant Pharmova, and I head the India branded pharmaceutical business. Interestingly, we've also launched our nutrition business, and we launched our brand Nutrihance about 5 months ago. And we are seeing good success and good traction on that, responsible for cardiovascular, diabetes, nutraceuticals, and remdesivir in critical care, which we launched sometime early August last year. So happy to be here, and would be more than keen to share how to make a successful RX switch. So thanks, and good luck.
Great, Vikas. Thank you so much. And last but not the least, can anyone guess who we're going to ask to introduce himself? Dhaval? Yes, it's you.
Hi, good evening, guys. My name is Dhaval Katkar. I have around 25 odd years experience across 3 different industries, some of them common with the panelist, which I'm sharing today the panel with. I've also started, with companies like L'Oreal and Godrej Soaps that Mr. Brajesh Kapil talked about. Worked there, and it was a lovely time in consumer good industries. Also worked with Heinz, with Shanta Prasad. We were part of the same compliant team that he's talking about. So always a nostalgic moment for me to talk about both these companies in a way. Post that, I've switched industry into media entertainment. I was always wanting to go into the entertainment side of the business. So worked with Walt Disney, Cartoon Network, Pogo, 2 of the kids brands. Also handled the P&L for HBO, one of the movies. And after that, I 6-7 years in media entertainment. I came into consumer healthcare, which is slightly different industry again. But worked with Piramal for a very long time across sales, marketing, and modern trade, alternate channels, business heads, multiple roles, and handled brands like Superdin, which is in nutrition. Along with that, there are other brands in skincare like Lactocalamine, etc. And my current role is with Glenmark, where I'm heading the OTC business and trying to build the business after the VWash divestment you guys may be aware about. We've recently also switched Candid Cream, and from Candid Cream has come from just a recommended product to a doctor prescribed product to consumer product. So that's something that, as we speak, is the early stages of first 2 months. So happy to share some of the mistakes I have made, something that which have made me learn some intelligent lessons, and also happy to share a little bit of knowledge from the media entertainment side, which puts consumer first, especially kids. Because otherwise, how kids are, they watch the same content again and again. So it's a very different ball game. So happy to share what to get into the consumer insight first, and it was a lovely journey, and looking forward to an exciting discussion today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dhaval. And before we dive, a very quick introduction about myself. Not much to talk about. My name is Dr. Vikram Munshi. 3 companies. One company is common with Sameer. I'm an ex-GSK pharma person. Then one company is common with Brijesh. I'm ex-Ranbaxy Pharma. And the third is my own company, Whitefish Consulting. For the last 10-11 years, we've been there and based out of Gurgaon. And one observation to all the participants, especially those of you who are from pharma. Do you see one thing? Every single panelist who's over here has worked or switched careers, switched roles, switched responsibilities, right? And I think that is a strength of diversity, which is of experiences which actually build up a professional. And sometimes in pharma we get too bogged down that I'm so therapy specialist, I would specialize in this therapy. But the panel that you see over here, whether it's education, pharma, nutrition, OTC, consumer goods, all adds to the experience. And I think that's the topic is also about switch, and all the panelists and including the humble moderator is also, we've done our own switches in our own careers. So let's dive in straight away. How we want to, it's a very open discussion for the audience. You can, while we are discussing, if there's some questions which come, please type it in the chat box to Amit, whom would you would like to the question to be answered by. And at the end of the session or something, we will address those questions. Basically, we are structuring this into 3 parts. One is a bit of background about background questions and discussion, what we call a background gyan. Then I think one of the panelists had mentioned nuts and bolts. So then we come down to the nuts and bolts of what is critical and what is not critical for making a switch. And finally, the third section will be about what are some of those common things which get overlooked when making a switch. So some like critical success factors. So Dhaval, let's start off with you because.
Sure.
Right. So I think the last time when we had this round, we were into the first phase of COVID had just passed, right? So, and today we are seeing, we just crossed a very brutal second wave, right? And even in that time you had mentioned, I want you to just enumerate what, apart from COVID, do you see are the macro drivers which are favoring, a switch to nutritional, in your view?
I think there are multiple macro drivers that are favoring a switch. In fact, the fact that people are even more busy at home than what they were normally in office. So there is, first of all, there is no downtime, as we all know, right? I mean, you're struggling between home chores to office seamlessly till late hours. So you can't afford to have a downtime, which means you can't go to a doctor and wait and, at a GP. So you are likely to pop in something that brings you back. So, which means, in other words, you're self-medicating yourself. So that's a very big macro driver, the way I see. And that pressure on time, irrespective of whenever you are, will always be there. Second thing is, I think, general awareness towards immunity, because post-COVID, and you have seen the sales in nutritional business in post-COVID have zoomed through the thing. In fact, Brijesh keeps on sharing some of the top brands on LinkedIn, and I've seen some of the messages that he keeps on sharing. There is a dramatic shift in consumption of the brands across the world, not only in India, into nutrition, trying to build immunity. That's a second big shift I see. Third thing is generally, people are generally slightly more health and nutrition conscious now as compared to what they were perhaps 5-7 years back. And that trend is likely to increase because general health and wellness awareness has always been increasing. It's just in the rise, the way I see it with the younger generation. So at least the way I see things. Right. So these are the 2-3 macro things that I see are in a potentially a very good starting point for considering switches at this time. And fourth critical thing is today, technology has democratized distribution. And earlier a Unilever or somebody like a GSK or L'Oreal had a distribution advantage. So today, that thanks to Amazon's and the e-commerce platform, that has democratized distribution. You can still be a 100 crore brand without being physically present anywhere.
Yes.
And provided you are investing into those and trying to build trials, because in India, whichever way you cut the data, the numbers are so small that there is a humongous roadmap towards trial. And the moment you have an access to technology and a good internet connection, I think you can build a damn good brand, provided you have an ability to invest and understand analytics that goes behind it. Because this is an entire world triggered by analytics, not necessarily only by the good old way of putting the brand on television and forgetting it. So, it's a lot of CPC campaigns. How do you get your, people to click, buy, try, share on social media, and, the network effect, as we call. So all of that, I think, makes it a apt time. In fact, these are most exciting times that we all are collectively living in to build something new.
Right. Great. So I think the point which you told about, self-medication, I think that also ties in with what Nutrify stands about for responsible nutrition, when we're talking about, and you talked about immunity, which got a huge fillip because of COVID. You talked about the health awareness, which was there, but again, it got a fillip. And I think this point about technology, which you mentioned about, democratizing your availability, that if you have invest in the right place, you don't be physically present everywhere. You can actually be the Goliath or David, which can take on the Goliath, thanks to technology. That's interesting. And so these are some of the changes which are happening, which we are seeing. So Brijesh, my question to you would be that if we are looking at these changes of consumer behavior, is there anything else which you see? And very importantly, which are those categories which are seeing the changes in consumer behavior, and maybe how are the organizations coping with it? Brijesh.
Thanks, Vikram. I think Dhaval has put it very nicely, like those 4 parameters on which macro drivers which have driven categories. But 2 quotients in the consumer's mind have really gone through the roof thanks to COVID, which is both health and hygiene. So hygiene, you see, like a spurt of, like brands coming up. You take the Lifebuoys, you take the Daburs, every pharma company, non-pharma companies have also come with their slew of sanitizers, your masks, etc. So hygiene quotient is, like 1 bit. The health quotient, which translates into or subsumes into the immunity part, that has given a huge fillip over to the nutrition. Like what COVID had done, like last year, if you look at, say, the first, when it struck, and then, like first few months and all, the COVID wave 1, everyone was groping, the whole scientific community was groping what this demon is. And I've had, like personal interactions with few, like of people who thought, like the world is coming to an end.
Right.
Means that was the extent of, like scare. So anything that anybody talked on, guys latched up to it, something to do with immunity. You had brands like your Zincovit, like topping the charts. It became the largest brand in the IPM. You had Dex Orange making it right over to the top. It still is amongst the top 10 brands and all, which was lurching way back as, like amongst top 20 brands and all in the Indian pharma market. So pharma market, if you look at even the MAT numbers today, is driving business at a whopping 16% gains. Nutraceuticals, as Amit mentioned right at the start, has grown, like 22%. It has tapered down to 14-15%. But 14-15% on a 22% growth is, like still a humongous number. That the base that it created last year, it's been, like huge. And what is driving at, say, the consumer level are these 2 big coefficients. You had Reckitt Benckiser registering, who used to not even get a percent, like growth and all, has registered 20%, like growth last year, thanks to their Dettol's, their hygiene, as well as, the Mucinexes and all, et cetera, like on a global basis. So what has led to this at a consumer level has been that vitamin mineral supplements, there is one thing unique about this category. That if I were to ask you, do you need it today, Vikram, a tab? You won't be in a position to say yes or no. But do you need a cough syrup? But do you need a pain reliever? Do you need any, antidiarrheal or for constipation? Your specific answer would be yes or no. There won't be any gray and all in that.
Right.
And despite a doctor telling you that for VMS, do you need one? Your answer would be, like all will elusive. The other categories, you use it and you feel the difference. Like you stop coughing, your pain goes off. But while you consume a nutraceutical or a VMS, nothing happens. So there is a huge post-purchase dissonance. But what COVID has ended up doing is, because of the immunity factor and the fear of the unknown, what if people have lapped up whatever is there for immunity. So once in a while I consume, so Revital as a brand I was associated with, and a lot of the pharma brands and all, say in the VMS, almost 25% of the volume share and all in India of VMS I've handled at Merck and then P&G Health. The sheer quantum of people taking the dose is never ever regular. So Revital consumption through UNA studies was sitting around 70, 80 capsules a year per consumer. So once in, like 4 days or once in a week, or the guy chips are down, feeling weak, and the fellow will pop it. What COVID has done is the guy has started taking it regularly, every day, because the guy would feel that something would happen to me if I'm not regular with my dosage of vitamins or the nutraceuticals, which are supposed to be providing immunity. The second thing used to be within the family, a lot of researchers and all that I've been through, there are one or two people, like the husband is taking, but no one else in the family is taking. During COVID and the fear of the unknown, it has pushed everyone in the family to take. So that has almost, like quadrupled the number of guys who are picking it up. And lot many guys who were never ever consuming the category, they came into the category of nutraceuticals. And there is a Ipsos survey which says that the number of the consumption drivers and all of regularity of usage, people sticking to the dosage, what is recommended, more numbers in the family who are consuming it, has given a strong boost over to the overall consumption of nutraceuticals.
Okay.
So those are, like I would say at the patient level drivers and all, because just to, like state that you put on a mask, you use sanitizers, that's, like all external say that you are put on a mask. But while you are communicating, you are talking, while you are drinking water or eating with, like friends and folks and all, etc., means you open that up. So you need an internal mask, and all the vitamins, minerals, and nutraceuticals are providing that internal mask, which provides the internal immunity just in case the virus enters your body. I'm, like protected. I have my internal mask on. And that is what is given to Philip to this whole category.
Thanks, Praji. I think that was very well put. The internal nutritionals are like an internal mask. Now, Samir, from your global perspective, like we've seen, nutritionals from pharma, traditionally being that, you recall we were discussing about that example, when my father would tell me that, whether you study or you don't study, your marks remain more or less the same, right? And that was not a very flattering comment, incidentally, but that was what he would say. And nutraceuticals was something like that. अच्छा पर्चा में लिख दिया है, खा रहा है वो भी ठीक है, नहीं खाया वो भी ठीक है. And but this has given a fillip. So Samir, from your perspective, because you worked in also FMCG and across the globe, do you think this behavior change? We all hope that that vaccine will, the vaccination will take place and we'll be all covered. But do you feel that this behavior change of consuming nutraceuticals for immunity will be sustained even after COVID?
So it's a difficult one, right? So if you look at what's happening globally, the entire, say, vitamin C or immunity market has grown in multiple countries in the 30s and 40% in 2020, and actually is declining in the first couple of quarters, right? So you are seeing significant downsides coming in, but it's not going down to the base levels. So definitely, I think that habit change has happened. But I think there are two fundamental changes that have happened, which are beyond the obvious, and which, again, you just think about it, one from a consumer point of view and one from a company point of view. From a consumer point of view, for the first time, people are actually getting aware about data, about words like clinical trials, which they never even heard about earlier. And suddenly it's become common knowledge. You're talking about accuracy, you're talking about data, which was never there earlier, right? And that gives pharma companies a huge edge of putting in products which actually has strong data behind it. Because up until now, it was everybody was making all those claims, and a person who made a claim and a person who didn't make a claim, had data or didn't have data, didn't really matter. Absolutely. But now that data is mattering. And at the same point of time, pharma companies for the first time are seeing actually that the prescription businesses have gone down because patients have just not been going to the doctors. But they're seeing that OTC business have been hugely resilient and growing. So suddenly there is excitement coming in, and pharma companies are willing to invest time and money, because up until now, basically the trend across the world was pharma companies were getting rid of OTC. So you've seen two major shifts happening. And from an India perspective, what's also happened is that up until now, Ayurveda, traditional Indian herbs, was struggling to get established globally and get acceptance globally because there was just no data. They didn't adhere to the global Western medicine principles of publishing data. And now suddenly you're seeing so many Indian companies getting the money and actually publishing data, even on Ayurveda and herbs, which never happened earlier. So all of this is going to help in terms of the consumer behavior is already shifted. And this data coming in will help you actually get into much more targeted segments, which will keep that consumption going. Now, whether it remains at peak COVID levels, it's doubtful that it will remain in 2022. But over a period of time, it's a one-way trend. It's always going to go up.
Yeah, it won't come back to zero. Like even other behavioral trends or working from home, there are certain permanent changes which have come. That's what.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So coming to this, the whole thing of this RX and OTC, and Shanta, I want to ask you over here that what do you feel? I mean, you've been a part of Switch, and you've handled hybrid models of promotion on building a brand. What, according to you, would be some of those internal considerations which a company should take, that okay, this brand is now ready from a switch from RX to OTC?
Great, Vikram. I think that's an important question to start off with, and I would break it into two parts, and there are two short answers, I think, to it. I think the first question is, when should I make the switch, and the second is what factors, perhaps. So the one-line answer to when do I make a switch is, if we feel as a pharma brand, we feel that the opportunity, if I look at the source of growth, if that opportunity is maxed out as far as indication, specialty, all of that is considered, right? While it's maxed out,
right?
But you still see that category growing, right? Right. Then the question that you ask is that perhaps my source of growth is going to come from self-medication, or maybe driving awareness or education to consumers to do some amount of diagnosis, etc. So if your opportunity is maxed out at RX, and if you see that going to consumers, then is possibly an area for you to think about whether I can make that switch. But I think the most important question is, what are the factors that I need to consider while making that switch? And one could argue, and look at it from various lenses, but I think I look at four aspects that are very important. And I think the first aspect is about the HCPs, right? Because you're moving from a fundamentally successful business till now, may not be growing, but it's got a base. We're moving. And we waste time in thinking about, what if the doctors leave the RX? What if my RX starts falling? The question to ask is, what is the role that you want the HCPs to play for you, right? If the HCP, RX is important, it needs to continue, then perhaps you want to still continue engaging them, and then look at the model. But important thing is that, is it okay for the HCP endorsement to stop? Is it that they're going to continue? So maybe you want to continue engaging them, so on and so forth. But I think, what is the role that the HCPs will play when you make the switch? I think that's an important question to answer. When you move into a direct to consumer, the second question is readiness on, do I understand my competitive context in the direct to consumer space? Who's my competition? Whom am I going to go after? What are their models? And most importantly, what is my right to win there? What am I going to solve for? What is the need gap or the opportunity that I'm going to solve for? So, after thinking about the HCP, I would think about, do I have a value proposition as I'm getting into this space? I think the third factor, which is again important, is sometimes we just jump into the fire and, we're just getting burned and there's no way out. And I think it's important to really think that before I jump in, do I have the right infrastructure, whether it's distribution, whether it is your backend to support your marketing claims, whether it's your business insights team to help you with the KPIs. Do I have the right infrastructure, and do I have the optimal investment? And I'm underlining the word optimal here, because there is always investment, but it is difficult sometimes in a pharma company to the finance director to explain that why do I need those 10 spots more, or why do I need that digital presence, right? Having a presence is not important. Optimal presence is important. Right. But having said that, you're answerable for the P&L. And the fourth factor that I would consider is, I think as a brand manager, I need to be very clear about my cost of acquisition. So after I invest, how many new trials am I going to generate? Every time I go on air, what is the repeat, that I'm likely to get from my existing users, and how do the unit economics look like? It's a tough one, but I don't think there's any other way to get to it. And finally, I think it's important you have a responsibility to go and show a P&L that this is how the current P&L looks like. Hey, I invest not maybe 2 years, but maybe 3 years, 4 years. This is the view that they look like. So this is how the P&L is going to look like. So I think these are 4 factors that are important from a readiness perspective if you see the opportunity coming from consumers.
Right. I think that's a very interesting point which you made, Shanta, regarding that. What role do we want the HCP to play, right? And especially when we're talking about this peculiar paradox that, what Samir was mentioning, that, data and everything, and, the HCP endorsing, and we are then going to the consumers. Somewhere I think this is merging, and it's very important that maybe the clarifying or having that clarity. Do we want the HCP to be endorser? Do we want him to be neutral, or do we want him to be? And what is that role which we want him or her to play? I think that's point very well taken. And I think the point about your infrastructure, when we talked about other things about the channel and all that, Vikas is there I would put the next question to him on this. That how, Vikas, what this thing about this channel and infrastructure, what we're talking about, what is your view on this?
Sure. So I think when it comes to making a switch, and I'd like to kind of first build on what Shanta said. So I believe there is always, this A, B, C, D of switch, and that's what we, kind of always worked on. One is, alignment. And when I say alignment, it's not just between sales and distribution, but it's alignment between all your stakeholders and your sales teams as well. So when we talk of channel or distribution, I think it is very, very critical to have the right balance and alignment between has your distribution reached or has your channel really reached a critical mass before you want to make that switch. Because I have seen a lot of good brands, they've fallen prey to this switch because it's very, very, glamorous, as you said at the start, to kind of move on to media, to go the consumer way. But in the process, what you do is you kind of create that imbalance between what you have versus what you want to aspire, right? So I think from a channel and distribution standpoint, it is absolutely critical to first internally align and balance as to where do you want to reach in terms of your KPIs. So a certain amount of distribution, whether it is numeric, whether it is weighted distribution, benchmark competition. And so I was talking about A, B, C, D. So A is alignment, B is balance between investment, right, between all levers, because you don't want to invest one over the other. I mean, a common struggle that I've seen is brands take almost a 180-degree switch from all the way RX, they move completely, or they try to move consumer. And in the process, they alienate the DNA or the HCP aspect of it, right? So that is the balance which is absolutely critical to get. The third one really is communication and channel, of course. So how do you communicate your proposition to first your internal stakeholders and your external stakeholders is equally important. Is the sales and distribution team aware at a ground level of what are the key parameters for success, right? And that brings me to the D part of it, which is dashboard. I think each and every function, it is critical to have your set of KPIs to define what success looks like. I think when we were working on brands, like Pediasure, Ensure, between the medical team or the demand generation team, in-clinic team, between the distribution team and the marketing team, success KPIs or parameters were like Bible. I mean, nobody would be allowed to touch it. Nobody would be allowed to change it during the year. Or
they were absolutely separate. They
were absolutely separate. Right. So I think that is one very critical aspect of channel and distribution is at no point in time should one move ahead of the other. And I'll give a small example. If you're trying to advertise in one state, where your distribution is either way behind or way ahead of where your demand proposition is, you're either going to have stock returns because you've kind of over distributed and media presence is not balanced, right? Or if you're over investing in terms of media, but you don't have the right distribution, you're going to waste a lot of money and resources, and you're going to hurt your P&L in terms of being under distributed, because you will eventually have stockouts, way sooner than you expect from a channel standpoint, and as a result of which, the brand that has kind of just started the journey of acceleration will face a bad experience from retail, from trade, and from consumers. So those are some of the different aspects of channel, which like I said, the ABCD, very very basic fundamental stuff, but a lot of brands in order to get there soon or get there fast, they kind of end up missing on or prioritizing one over the other.
Yeah,
right. So that is
that compromise. Somewhere the compromise is made.
Absolutely, and now with yes,
Sorry.
absolutely, and now with so much of digitization and technology, right? I think online and digital sales is critical. I mean, because what might happen is you might build your infrastructure, or you might build your brand for offline sales. But online now is no longer a function of how much you advertise online. It's a function of how the consumer is really accelerated, or how the shopper is really accelerated in the journey because of COVID. So whether you want it or not, whether it is today a RX brand, an OTC brand, or a consumer brand, your consumer will try and search you online, right? And it's no longer a choice that stays with the manufacturer or the marketer. Right. So that is the last aspect of how do you treat digitization. Are you really prepared? Because that's an important channel as well. Right. I mean, no longer channel is only about offline. So how well are these levers, well balanced and prepared for each other? I think that really determines the success while making a switch from RX to OTC.
Wonderful, and I think that's very important for all the participants also. I think the ABCD, what Vikas mentioned: alignment, balance, communication, and your dashboards. What is not measured will not be done. I think this is applicable to even our traditional pharma businesses, which we are doing. How we allocate resources, is there alignment between sales and marketing, whatever, right? But that's an important point, and thank you so much, Vikas, for mentioning that.
Just one point, Vikram. Just to add to what all of them have said, I just wanted to go back to switch one, in which this question was also asked, and I thought even there was one part of the answer that Brijesh had given. I'm just kind of paraphrasing him, that when the prescriptions are dropping or are stagnant, and the volumes are still growing marginally, it's a good time to consider a switch. And correct me if I'm wrong, Brijesh, that's not something you had mentioned that time. But that's a good sign in my view. That things are, volumes are growing. That means trials are happening. Either the prescriptions are stagnated or dropping. So there is an opportunity there, which means consumers are self-medicating and trying. And that's a good time to, put some tailwind behind the brand and put investments, distribution, and all the other things that Vikas or Shanta Prasad talked about, and then try and build a brand. Just thought of that.
I think that's a very valid. In fact, thanks for refreshing that. So, Brijesh, coming to you also, because you, in those Ranbaxy days, you handled these, oversaw these very successful switches that you mentioned. Just my take on this. What do you recall? What was the impact on these two brands on the prescription when we switched to OTC?
So prescription dependence, if you look at Revital 2005, I took over December, and the division was made in 2002 in Ranbaxy.
Yes.
So there were 3-4 years of consumerization which had happened. The brand was 40% prescription dependent, and to build up, Dhaval, thanks for remembering that. And the point for the appropriate time for switches when prescriptions dropping and your volumes are rising. Because what ends up happening is your prescriptions are dropping because perhaps a new molecule has come. So maybe if you are consuming paracetamol for pain relief and everything, before diclofenac hits, the market, and the consumers get used to diclofenac type of pain relief, they would stop consuming, paracetamol. So if you have delayed the switch, the corollary is that the consumers are exposed to a much superior brand, whereon they find the pain relief of a far superior order, and you would end up losing if you delay the switch. So that's, over to the other parts. So So if we really look at 40% was the prescription dependent. So it is very critical for anybody planning switch to track up the prescription dependence. You get IQVIA, Esperi data, prescription analysis. They track up, like with a set of 5,000 doctors and all, the prescriptions which are being generated in metro and class 1 towns. And you need to figure out as to what are the volumes, what are the number of prescriptions, what is the dosage recommended, what is the duration to get the units, the total units which are coming through fresh prescriptions as a percentage of total sales. And if this track, like shows declining trend, that's when you make the switch. So Revital was 40% prescription. And when I left it in 2013, it was amongst the largest brands in the IPM, top 5 brands. And the prescription dependence was barely 4%. So the sales rose through all the advertising and everything from a 50 crore to 316 crore in 6-7 years time. I took the brand to virtually means, like the prescription dependence came down to just barely 4%. Volini was again sitting close to 60% that we switched in 2007. And virtually the prescription dependence came to 8% in 2013. And the brand was, like somewhere close to 200 crores from a 30 crore base. But how you actually do it is, like extremely critical. Number one, for any pharma company planning a switch, a RX to OTC switch can happen only for pharma companies. The pharma company, when they decide to make on, like the switch, it's extremely critical that prescription tracking is, like one part. And what is say the product has to do the talking. Any pharma company would not be having deep pockets like your GSK, P&G, Novartis, or Abbott to continually, like spend behind the brand. So your product has to do the talking. And if your product does not talk to the consumer, you'll have just enough money. Most of the OTC attempts have failed. Even I had Cherikov, I had Pepsis, I had garlic pearls. I never promoted those because, like you never had the money and they were not talking to the consumer the way Revital and Volini were. And these were corroborated out of not just the concept research, it was corroborated by the concept and use. We did home placement of Revital, home placement of, like Volini, whereon 90% of the consumers said we'll switch out of your Move, IDEX, Amritanjan, and Zandus. So very clearly, the product has to do the talking. The packaging is the other part, your retail execution is the other part, your customer and consumer value equation, that goes, like, and brand communications, that becomes extremely critical. Not that just I go on television and, like it works up. Like I'll tell you interesting bit about, like a Volini switch. The sales was 30 crores when the switch happened, with lots of, like dumping, which typically happens before the switch and all, etc. by the pharma group. Now, the awareness levels when I did the brand dipstick was sitting at 8% levels with the consumer.
8%.
8%.
Okay.
And Revital by that time was already sitting at 40, 43, 45 odd percent. Now, I had close to 30 crore budget. On a 30 crore brand, 25 crore of the spends I put on Volini. Because with that 30 crore budget, I would have taken Revital awareness from a 43 to at best 50. But Volini, I would have taken from a 8% to as high as 30% with that money.
Right.
So I reallocated and there was lots of hue and cry and all. I said, trust my FMCG experience. What I'm doing, I'll deliver you on both. So please, let me do what I want to. And I put on that money and there was no looking back and all for Wallet. Because 90% of, say, the consumer, the product was doing talking. I did samples of Revital and Volini on account of product doing the talking with the consumer of 5 crores each. You can't imagine, I'm talking 50 million samples of Revital were pumped out, like every year to any of the magazines and all, so that you could see right from Farm and Food to Cosmopolitans to Feminas, name it. And the same was done, like with Volini, progressively through the sachets, that on a Dainik Bhaskar, you put on the sachet, stick it over, and 48 lakh consumers of Dainik Bhaskar get it, like the next day. And the users of Move, users of Zandu, IDEX, Amritanjan they happen to use, like Volini once, they would automatically do the switches.
Wonderful.
So all that I would say is, like you need to do that marketing mathematics as to where to also, like allocate monies, what prescriptions are going to get, what, the media is going to, like deliver you. You have to be constantly on, say, the data and, like brand dipsticks that'll keep on throwing, and do your maths and figure out as to, like what's the best way to work it up. Your P&L first 2-3 years will go down when you do, like any of, say, the switches. But after 2-3 years, it will give you something to reckon with.
Great.
And there is one of my sayings that a pharma brand, if it does not do well for whatever reason, dies, like a death of an unknown. But a switched brand with lots of spend, if it has to die, it can be resurrected because of the brand goodwill and can be sold out, like GSK has done with lot many tail brands and all, that, like it has a value which can be sustained for long.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Samir, there is a lot of people feel like what the point Brijesh was telling, that the mathematics, the big promo spend, and we talked about people that say that digital is cheap and digital spend is a way, an option. What are your views on this? That is, digital ad spend is there, but is it as cheap as it is made out to be? What are your views?
No, not at all, right? So it's, and I can see Dhaval smiling, right? As in, this is such a popular misconception. Digital pe laga do and ho jayega, right? As in, it isn't. As in, to the contrary, as in, if you really want to do digital well, as in, you're talking of spends that could be higher than traditional media. And this is not, but I think before I answer that question, Vikram, there's a fundamental thing that we haven't talked about here. I think Vikas talked about it beautifully in terms of what are the various factors that you need to look at. The biggest thing I've seen, so I've done my last 4 roles, have been literally going in as the first person from consumer into a pharma business and trying to launch a consumer business within that. And the fundamental shift that has to happen is a mindset shift in the organization. And it's very difficult to put that down on paper on what that means. But this is a complete cross-functional mindset shift that has to happen when you're moving into a consumer space, because it impacts everything. And we'll talk about it later on, what it impacts. But it's not just marketing, right? It's not just sales. It's product, it's packaging, it's pipeline, it's innovation, it's how you talk to consumers. So all of that has to change. And even for a brand right now, even if you're not switching it, but if it's an OTC brand going to doctors, you still have to go digital because your patients are still going to search up the product.
Correct.
So you can't afford, even if you're not going direct to consumer properly, you'll still have to have your basics in place. So coming back to your question around digital, it is expensive. But it's worth it because you can measure a lot of it. But you can take it to an extreme of going pure performance marketing route and basically optimizing it so much that you're basically only optimizing for sales and not building a brand. So there's a danger of people who actually get into pure digital and say that we'll just go into performance marketing. And performance marketing is basically how much sales does that generate.
Right.
But now digital is a channel that actually building your brand. So you've got to think about it very carefully. And in digital, the cost is not just about the media that you're putting in, but there's a huge cost and time element in terms of production of content. Because you need to constantly churn out good content that's relevant. You need to have the analytics, you're listening to consumers, you're adapting it. So it's unlike the TV model of make one mega campaign, it'll run for the next 1.5 to 2 years.
Correct.
Here you constantly have, and that cost of generating content is significant as well, right? But then the mindset comes in terms of testing. You need to do A/B testing all the time, figuring out what the right channels are, and channels are changing dramatically, and figuring out what formats work on what channels, because one format will not work on the second channel. Things like e-commerce, right? If you're getting into e-commerce, the concept of an A+ listing is so critical. As in basics like having more than 150 characters in your Amazon listing, having 5 bullet points, having infographics, can dramatically influence the kind of success rates you get. So this is very core understanding of digital. That needs to be done rather than just saying कि digital में चले जाते हैं. It's not as easy as that.
Right. And it's, unfortunately, it's construed like that. कि digital is cheap and करना है digital करना है. That kind of stuff. And Dhaval, you were talking last time. We talked about customer acquisition and some KPIs, which is that we're going to spend a huge amount of money to make your brand aware to whether digitally or physically, right? And we'll talk about the KPIs in the next question. But what I want to ask you, is it worth it? Is there a brand loyalty which exists in, say, if you're talking about nutritionals compared to, say, other categories like pain or, cough, what Brijesh was talking about? How does brand loyalty get impacted?
I think you can argue on both sides of the table that there is complete brand loyalty or there is no brand loyalty. And I'll tell you why I say that. Because why there is no brand loyalty is because the reason to change. Many people, we are creatures of habit, all of us. Many a times we just keep consuming the same thing. We keep taking the same road to the office. We have a certain everyday way of doing things. And unless you shake me, I'm unlikely to change. And that, I think 9 out of 10 people are like that. And that's just the reason that if you see that, that's really coming from a brand loyalty point. Other side is that, if you give a good reason to try, you'll have to give something. And I think Brijesh talked about concept testing, use testing. And me and Shanta Prasad had the luxury of working on Complan Kesar Badam, which was launched that time, where we were up against Horlicks at that time. But that brand had a concept test of 4.9 and a CUT's test of 4.8. When you have something like that on a 5-point scale, it's going to shake things. Because and that actually happened. The year one, the brand touched 100 crores. The extension of a brand touched close to 100 crores. It was just a flavor. And the Kesar Badam became a category in itself on Complan. Today, that extension of that one flavor would be a 500, 600 crore plus. So, and I don't know, I'm not following MFD market lately, but that flavor changed the game. We were the first to come in because it was an Indian desi flavor. Most of the flavor in MFD were either chocolate, strawberry, and so on. So to say, English flavors.
Correct.
Here comes a brand which says Kesar Badam. If you go to Tamil Nadu, you'll see Badam milk being sold everywhere. It's a common Indian thing. It's just an observation. And I think we were lucky to work at that time on a brand. And as Brijesh said, there was enough money put on the brand. All the money went on advertising that flavor and not basic Complan. Because we saw when you have a product which is at a use test giving you 4.8 on a stage, CUT, you got to back that horse fully. And that changed the game because that got trials. And in most of these categories, whether it's nutrition or any other business, in India, the first 5-6 years of the category, you're only building trials. Because especially when you switch a brand, you're only building trials. And I wanted to add to what Brijesh was talking about and all the factors from RX to OTC that he mentioned. One more factor I would like to add to that is the number of consumer base of a RX brand, not the percentages. He talked about percentages, but the number of consumers actually buying it. Okay. And if the consumers are, let's say, 20 lakh, 30 lakh, 40 lakh, then you can actually, there is a tailwind because then the word of mouth spreads. Because if percentage may be very high, but the base may be, let's say, 4 lakh, 3 lakh consumers. But that doesn't, then you have to invest that more to create that trials. But even the consumer base of a RX brand, and I wouldn't know what was that for the brands that he talked about, Volini as well as this, but I will hazard a guess that it will be very high, even at that rate. So when the consumer base is high, you get that confidence that I can definitely switch this brand. So it's the moment you have a very good product, your trials are bound to happen, and that's really where you shake the consumer and make them switch from the loyal brand to something new. So you got to give them something that is solving a fundamental problem. In case of Complan, when we solved the problem was of taste, because none of the MFDs were really tasty, because kids are having it. And then there is a consumer and there is a customer. The mother is a customer and the kid is a consumer. You got to understand whom you want to bet your money on. So you are tactically putting money on a customer in terms of pricing, but you're strategically putting money on R&D, which is the product.
The consumer.
So you got to understand where you're playing because you have limited resources. Everybody has a P&L pressure and everybody has limited resources. So you got to put money where the mouth is and try and back when you get a good product in research, which will shake some loyalty of a competitive brand. And most brands, when they come into the category, and I'm not talking new innovation, most of the RX to OTC is an existing category. And research after research shows that you gain by snatching share and not by growing category when you are coming. So that is something that you can see. You generally have to snatch share. The leader will always be there who's growing the market. But when you're coming new, you have to make yourself viable in the category as one of the players. in coming into the mind space of the consumer.
Right.
Those are few pointers that came to my mind.
I'll just, I think, Dhaval, the point which you made, and this is for all the pharma attendees. See, when we're talking, Brijesh talked about this when he was talking about sampling. Samir is talking about this. Dhaval is talking about this. A wide user base, a very wide user base, and this is something for even our pharma brands which we see. We are very focused on, a few doctors writing a huge amount of product, our pyramid, and we forget about the spreading the prescriber base, because that actually gives the tailwind. And somewhere, and I'm being very blunt about it, in pharma, we get very, very taken in. I'm not talking about the key super specialty products, but mass products, 80-20% rule. But we forget that the middle and the lower end of the pyramid, the wider prescribers, the occasional users, are the ones which actually give you the tailwind, give you the word of mouth. So I think that's a learning. That's a very important point, Dhaval, even for, I think, pharma thing who operate only the ethical prescription route. It's a very important learning for them also. Shanta, what is your view on this about the loyalty? And you were mentioning, offline, that you would like to. How does loyalty happen in these categories of?
Great. I think Dhaval spoke about brand loyalty as it exists can be argued either ways, and he did touch upon an important point of when the switches happen from a loyalty. Do you have something as a disruptor, right? So that's when somebody comes as a challenger, you're trying to switch someone. But let's just talk about a brand who wants to drive loyalty, from the user base that they have. And I'm going to touch a bit about, some of the models that we were, we deployed. And I'm going to pick up the example of Pediashot. So again, it comes, it should come from your strategy. It's not necessary that every brand has to focus on loyalty. Certain categories may not have the element of loyalty, but here was a nutrition supplement category which gets consumed month on month, and getting a new consumer every time is just so expensive. And we didn't have a Horlicks or a Complan model, or a Bonvita model, where just the sheer distribution and advertising and their existing word of mouth would have helped. What helped us was, can we think of smarter CRM models, which means that apart from our acquisition model, which was about that at any touch point, whether it's digital, whether it's point of sale, whether it is activations at the waiting area, any of these models, if we are able to get a consumer contact, can we put them through a black box, which we would call the CRM tool. And this was a means to drive loyalty or compliance or, regularity with the brand. And what would happen typically here is that if you've had that contact, then within 7 days, you get a call from a dietitian talking about what was the experience, what did you kind of hear? So that's like a trigger point. Then you talk to the mother, not about the product, but about some of the challenges, concerns she's facing with the child's nutrition, which is why it was a dietitian. And then you talk about, the role of a nutrition supplement, because these are behavioral changes which are going to take time. So there is receptivity. Once you have this mother hooked on, and mind you, in any nutrition supplement, I think the product experience is critical. If the product experience works, then we've seen we used to actually track one of those KPIs saying that how many mothers did we contacted, how many actually tried, and we would call them every month because it's a monthly purchase category. Did they buy Pediasure? Again, it's time to buy it. You could incentivize it with some coupons and so on and so forth. Again, so if I zoom back, I think the larger point that we are making here is, can we design brand loyalty? Can we design compliance? I think some of the models, sometimes pharma can lend to consumer as well, right? Think of oncology, think of insulin's business, how they lend in. So a CRM model where instead of playing as a pure consumer and waiting for word of mouth and acquisition, can we actually have a database? Can we reach out to these users and find newer ways of getting them to use our brand?
Vikram, I think we have run short of time now. So I know there was two.
Time has just flown.
I know. I wouldn't have loved to. I wouldn't have actually wanted to stop it, but then the other schedules, so people are sending messages. So fine. I think what I'll do is I'll still take up some Q&A session.
And I just have one question because then we take the Q&A. Is it possible?
Sure.
2 minutes. And this is, I want to ask this question to Vikas, because when you're discussing offline, I just want, Vikas, if you could tell, you were mentioning about do's and don'ts of, making a successful, switch. What are, according to you, are the 3 or 4 don'ts which you must not do to ensure that you make a successful switch?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I would say the first and foremost is don't make the switch if you are not really committed to balancing your resources and to aligning your resources. I think that's the number one point, because what will happen is you will end up kind of derailing what you already have just because you want to chase a consumer goal out there. So one is I would say critical don't is get your balance and alignment right. I think that's the number one point. The second part really is that if you do not have a mechanism which can help you with tracking what you expect from each of the functions, don't make that switch. And easier said than done, right?
Yeah.
And I'll talk maybe a few seconds about it. Is if you don't have a model where your erstwhile demand generation team or the in-clinic team can still continue to support your distribution and marketing team, please don't make that switch, because what happens is typically organizations or brands they move away from ethical or in-clinic, right, and they completely alienate the brand without realizing that the DNA of the brand was always ethical or pharma. Right?
Okay.
So what that does is that it confuses your field force, and they believe and they start thinking that I no longer need to get in those prescriptions which earlier I had to get because the brand is getting advertised. I no longer have to drive or push this brand as much because brand is getting distributed. So that's the balance and alignment that I was talking about. So if you are not ready to have a role for specific function, right, before and after, and that's why the dashboard piece is critical. Do not make the switch, and that's a critical pitfall. The last piece really is about communication and how you carry your sales and marketing team together, right? I remember when we made a critical switch, and this was again on Pediasure Ensure, and we are now doing that on Nutrients. It is critical to not just have that communication within stakeholders at head office or corporate office, but having your field team connect with you. And we traveled, region by region, because we underwent a very critical transition whereby the pharma operations moved from one team to the other. So the pharma team only focused on in-clinic demand generation, and the trade team and the FMCG team only took care of distribution as well as pharma operation. So while doing that, we moved from one region to the other, communicating to each and every cross-functional stakeholder, the sales team, of why this switch is important. So as an organization, if you are not committed, to that kind of, having that level of communication with your different stakeholders, please do not make the switch. And last, I know the pharma to consumer journey is always, very, very exciting and very tempting. But if you want to completely alienate your HCP or doctor or KOLs, please do not make that switch, because in the process you will end up, like I said, confusing and derailing a lot of good work that has already happened. There is never going to be an overnight success. There is never going to be a shortcut to it. It's not that you make a switch, advertise, and in 1 month you will suddenly see your awareness scores go up. I mean, I think Dish did a fantastic job with a couple of iconic brands, but I'm sure there was a larger commitment from the organization in terms of what the journey would be. So if you don't have the roadmap in place, if you don't want to do justice to what the pharma legacy is, then do not make the switch. I think those are 3-4 pitfalls, that I'd like to talk about.
Okay, so
Excellent. Thanks a lot,
Vikram,
Vikas. Yes,
can we close it? Yeah. So now that we hardly have any
regretfully,
time.
yes. Regretfully, yes.
Okay. What I'll do is there are many questions, but I'll just try to accommodate 2 or 3, and then we'll shift to the closing session. Okay. So let me pose the first question. So since point of sales becomes most critical for OTC sales, what are the available market survey tools available for measuring consumer sales, brand availability, retail stock, and product aging? Who would want to pick this up?
So I can take that since it involves fair bit of distribution, point of sale, etc. So I think Nielsen gives you a lot of data in terms of your distribution and brand availability. So there is weighted distribution, there is numeric distribution, there is stock on hand. You also get your data like share amongst handlers, which kind of tells you, and that's a very critical thing to measure when you're making the switch, because it tells you that for the outlets that you have gained in recency, what is the share that you've gained in those set of outlets. So that kind of tells you, is your model working or not. So there is numeric weighted, there is share amongst handlers, there is stock out of stock data which you get, and these days, because there is so much of digitization, you also get real-time data from online. Pharmacy chains now play a very, very critical role for OTC brands, online as well as offline pharmacy chains. So these kind of give you real-time data in terms of point of sale, and they tell you freshness of stock is something that gets measured again from Nielsen. What kind of freshness do you have in market? So those are 4 or 5 critical markers that you can look at from a point of sale, distribution, and availability standpoint.
Okay, great. I think I'll leave this to the last question that I'm going to put up. So when you're attempting to switch a brand from RX to OTC, what if your current prescriber stops prescribing as they see now patients can buy on their own and their indispensability is threatened?
Can I attempt that, Shanta here?
Yep.
Yeah. So I think a quick one on that. I think the first question, I think the starting point really is whether it really matters. I think it's important for the business to discuss whether it matters, that RX dropping is okay or not, right? It's sometimes okay for the RX to drop because you made that conscious choice. But let's just take a view of, I think the question is about how do I still protect, my HCPs when I'm making the switch? And if that's the question, then there are 2 or 3 ways of looking at it. I think one choice, that we have is, which is the popular conventional choice, that I will protect the RX market and there will be a variant for RX, but I may create a separate variant for the consumer space. And when I'm doing that, I think that what is really important is what is going to be different. What is so different that my consumers are going to pick it? But there is a choice of varianting. I'm personally not a big fan of that model, but I think it applies, and I think some of them have successfully deployed it. The second reason why HCPs generally drop is because you just stop engaging with them, stop investing with the doctors, right? They almost feel neglected. And if you think doctors are important while you're doing the CX, I think it's important to build that balance. And there are various ways of doing that, but that also means an investment. So you continue to invest in RX, you continue to invest in CX, and find a model of a sweet spot. And I think the last one I'm going to make, which is a lot of doctors sometimes just disassociate because you don't advertise responsibly. The basic premise of ethical advertising is do not irresponsibly sell the product. And that's also important to the brand, because you come as an expert when you come into the consumer space, unlike other consumer brands. And if you are playing a role, and I think there are 2 aspects that are important. One, I think your claims and your entire tonality is a responsible advertiser. Plus, if you're trying to also help the consumer in more ways than the product to improve their life and the problem that they're dealing with, I think these are some reasons why the doctors will still stay, Amit, in my mind. right? And that's how you can protect your doctor base rather than being paranoid about what if I lose the RX.
Okay, great. I think I'll call it today, and in fact, I'd like to invite the honorary secretary to IDMA GSB, Mr. Sumit Agarwal, to share his thoughts and closing remarks. For further questions, I'll forward it to the panelist, and as there's a response, I'll forward it to the respective people who had posed this question. Any further questions, you can send it to hello@nutrifytoday.com. Mr. Sumit Agarwal, please.
Thank you, Amit. Friends, when I first heard of this workshop, I thought it sounded more like a movie, The Switch 2, with a star-studded cast of experts on the panel. Today, after the workshop, I can confidently say it has proved to be a blockbuster. I think the only thing missing was probably the popcorn. I am sure the workshop has proven fruitful and productive for all of you, and has already set many minds thinking about the switch to OTC. We all have so many takeaways from the workshop, and thankfully we have been taught the ABCD of the switch too. And I think we really need to thank the stars of this show, the 5 panelists. So on behalf of all the participants, I would like to thank Mr. Sameer Desai, Mr. Vikas Bansi, Mr. Dhaval Katkar, Mr. Brijesh Kapil, and Mr. Shanta Prasad Nagarmat for taking time out for this workshop and for making this so interesting. Thank you, gentlemen.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
We also need to thank Dr. Vikram Munshi, the director of the movie, so to say,
Yeah.
who moderated the workshop so well.
Thank you, Vikram.
I would like to specially thank each and every participant who logged on to this webinar and made this so successful. Friends, as has been mentioned before, this workshop was jointly organized by IDMA Gujarat State Board and Nutrify Today, and we hope that there will be many more such joint workshops in the future. On behalf of IDMA GSB, I would like to thank Mr. Amit Srivastav of Nutrify Today for acting as a catalyst for this workshop and making this happen.
Thank you.
I would also like to thank the entire team of office bearers of IDMA GSB for their support in organizing this workshop. Last but not the least, a special thank you to Rajiv and other back office staff of IDMA GSB for all the coordination and support. With this, we probably come to an end to this workshop, and I look forward to all of you joining us for our upcoming webinars also.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.